John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. We got a lot of things to dive into. We talked a lot of Eagles yesterday. Today, we'll get into a little bit of Eagles. There is some little Eagles news to kind of dust off a little bit here, but a lot of NFL coaching stuff and a lot of playoff stuff with John here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John, how are you, my friend?
Doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing good, and of course, NFL Wild Card Weekend with the. I read the other day that ESPN is losing $75 million by airing the Oakland-Houston game because they don't get to pick which game they want. They get just the last one thrown to them, and there's so little interest in that game, I guess, advertising-wise, that they're going to take a $75 million hit on it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of bad break. They simulcast with ABC, so who knows how the NFL decides these things, but obviously it's high-stakes negotiations when it comes to the TV contracts. And unfortunately, I don't think anybody – 2 weeks ago, nobody envisioned this because the Oakland Raiders were one of the hot teams to watch with Derek Carr as a possible MVP candidate. And who knows? They could have been the number 2 seed. Kansas City could have been the number 5 seed. All of a sudden, he goes down late against Indianapolis. Then the backup gets hurt against Denver, and you're down to the third-string quarterback. So, it's tough for anyone to have predicted that. And if Derek Carr was there, I don't think this game is a throwaway, and I don't think they're losing all that money. Sometimes it's just bad luck, and that's what happened to the Raiders. It's what happened to ESPN. But while I say that, who's to say Connor Cook isn't going to play better than Brock Osweiler? I think there's a chance he might do that.
Well, it's not a great quarterback situation for either team, right? I mean, if Tom Savage is playing quarterback for the Texans on Saturday, I don't know that we're any more excited for that game. But you're right, Carr being out. Do you think Carr being out and seeing what happened to that team helps him, the perception about the possible MVP? I know what those votes are in, right?
Yeah, I don't think he was going to win it, but he was obviously in the top 5, and I think he still is. I don't think there's any question. And I don't know if it would have helped because everybody in this league knows how important a really, really good starting quarterback is. We don't need to be reminded that if you go from, say, Aaron Rodgers to Brent Hundley, it's going to be different. And the same is true in Oakland.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. We'll dive into these playoff games in a minute. I do want to get into some of the coaching. I'm intrigued by a lot. I love this time of the year where the coaches are spinning around, but I want to start with the Eagles situation because the Eagles denied John DeFilippo, right, a shot to go be an offensive coordinator potentially. Are you surprised that they did not give him that opportunity? A lot of times if you're going to make a lateral move, they might step in, but if you're going to be, upgraded, a lot of times they'll let you do that. So what's your read?
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk, and I wrote about that on 973ESPN.com because you can alienate the employee by stopping him from getting a promotion. I think the indication here is we talk about it all the time. The Eagles are trying to maximize the potential of Carson Wentz, and the last thing they want to do is shift everything around him. And so they don't want John to leave the organization. I think there was probably assurances made that if Frank Reich gets the Bills job, which I think is unlikely but possible, that he would be elevated to offensive coordinator. But only he knows if he's upset. Certainly he was an offensive coordinator before. Certainly he wants to be one again and probably a head coach. And you're closer to the ultimate goal if you have the title of OC. So, again, it's a very, very fine line to walk, and we'll see how it works out. But the Eagles wanted the same support system around Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and I understand it. Look, from a selfish standpoint, they don't want their guy to get out of here, right? I mean, they want to keep him around. And I think what you said, the fact that if Reich left, hey, John, you would be the offensive coordinator, but there's not a great possibility of that. So you hope that DiFilippo doesn't look like, hey, I could have been a coordinator and you kind of blocked me from it. You hope that doesn't, rock the apple cart at all. But I would assume that because they blocked him, they view DiFilippo in pretty high regards. You wonder what Reich thinks about that.
No, I don't think it affects Frank that much because Frank's going to be the offensive coordinator if he doesn't get a head coaching job. I think really the only person it affects is John because, again, you're right. I mean, it's just a higher stature in this league. There's no other way to look at it, going from quarterbacks coach to an offensive coordinator. The safety net of having another good coach in case your offensive coordinator does leave. And who knows? It's such a mess in Buffalo as far as the front office there and that ludicrous press conference the GM Doug Whaley had the other day. They're going to have trouble, luring the really, really good candidates. So if you have other options, you're probably not going to look at Buffalo. And then from there, Frank is obviously well known in the city as a longtime backup to Jim Kelly. So it's possible that things could morph and he could get that job and all of a sudden John's the offensive coordinator here. But again, I think that's probably unlikely.
Yeah, and just to throw it out there, the Bills have not formally requested an interview for Frank Reich, right? I mean, there's nothing even there yet, possibly.
No, and you're right as far as the indication that they wanted to interview him, but it tells you that he's lower down on the list because they're interviewing other guys first. And but when you talk about Sean McDermott, for instance, who interviewed there, Anthony Lynn, the interim coach, has gotten interviews elsewhere. All of those guys might have other opportunities. And all of a sudden, it might be what happened here last year when the Eagles started interviewing candidates, and it was Adam Gase, and it was Ben McAdoo, and it was even Tom Coughlin before they got to Doug Peterson, and Doug got the job.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 Eagles insider. Was DiFilippo a front runner for the Jets gig at all? Because I know that he has the Jets in his background.
Yeah, he was the quarterback's coach for the Jets in 2009. I do think an NFL source told me he was their top choice to be the offensive coordinator. Chan Gailey, they sort of forced into retirement earlier this week, and he was the guy. He was the number one guy. He was going to be, unless the interview went really, really poorly, he was going to be their offensive coordinator. And obviously, that's now off the table.
Yeah, it's interesting because as he asked the question, wondering how many, because as Pete brought up, he was with the Jets before. In fact, it's funny, the picture on the website has him in a Jets shirt on, so it's like, right, but the fact that the Jets might have got blocked from, maybe that's a good question, because I was wondering if he was a legitimate candidate for the Jets, or was he just one of those guys that, hey, we'll do you a favor, but it seems that he was a guy that the Jets legitimately, was at the top of their list.
Yeah, no question about it. It wasn't. They weren't doing him any favors because he worked there before. They had serious interest. And again, I believe he was their guy, and he would be the offensive coordinator if he got permission to interview there. And that's the fine line I was talking about, because his agent's going to certainly make him aware of that and aware of how interested the Jets were. So that's some sort of glad handing you have to do from Philadelphia's perspective and smooth things over. And that's where the promise of being the offensive coordinator, Frank Lees, comes in, and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, keeping things structured around Carson Wentz is the most important part of this organization's plan. They like what John did with him. He worked, remember, as the quarterback's coach, he was the one who worked closest to Carson Wentz on a day-to-day basis. And they really had a lot of respect for what he did with him. and they don't want to lose him.
John, how about Sean McDermott? Is this the year that he finally gets a head coaching gig?
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. He's getting a lot of interviews, and to me, it's always difficult for a defensive guy in this environment. It seems to get worse and worse each season because everybody seems to want to think offense first. But there's always different indications. Obviously, he was in Buffalo. He's going to interview in San Francisco. If you look about what happened with Rex Ryan, I think Buffalo's going to go offensive-minded. On the other hand, if you think about San Francisco and Chip Kelly, they might have a more open mind to go in a different direction. I don't think he's Kyle Shanahan or Josh McDaniels. I think those two guys are going to have jobs if they want them. And I can't say that about Sean McDermott, but he's certainly getting closer.
How about what happened in Washington today as we keep talking about coaches here?
Yeah, I think that's all about Wade Phillips. Wade Phillips is going to be on the open market. He's a free agent, and I think the Washington Redskins are going to make a strong push to get perhaps the best defensive coordinator in the game. And I think that's what this was all about, and the fact that they see a chance to upgrade and a chance to get not just a current great defensive coordinator, but maybe one of the best defensive coordinators ever, get him into Washington, and obviously that would improve that organization. And I think they're getting ready to make that push.
Yeah, keep it with Wade Phillips, who did not get any guarantees from John Elway that he could be back in Denver. Who is the front runner in Denver?
Well, I think Kyle Shanahan's the front runner, and obviously his dad coached there. And we'll see how it shakes out. But I've already said I question what John Elway's doing. I understand you don't want to force a defensive coordinator on a new head coach, so I understand it from that philosophy. But I don't know too many head coaches in this league that would turn down Wade Phillips to be their defensive coordinator. So that's one where I think you could have gotten away with just extending the defensive coordinator and then bringing in the head coach, as opposed to usually it's a really, really bad decision to force assistance. But in this case, I think it was a rare opportunity to do that, and I think Denver's making a mistake by letting Wade Phillips listen to other people.
Yeah, we're talking with John McMullen here, 97.3 ESPN.com, and, of course, FanRag Sports NFL. A lot of coaching questions, and we've just hit on a couple of them here. How about, as we were touching on, Jay Gruden makes the call on Joe Barry, the defensive coordinator there, who was let go today. In fact, the whole defensive staff, right, in Washington let go?
Not quite the whole. I don't know why a lot of headlines say that. Greg Minuski, the linebackers coach, is still employed as of now, and I think there's one other. But they blew out most of the defensive coaching staff, and obviously their Week 17 disappointment had a lot to do with it. That was a really, really bad loss against a Giants team that had nothing to play for. You're at home. You have everything to play for. They came out really, really flat, but it was mainly the offense. But, of course, the head coach isn't going to blame himself. You got to blame somebody, and it's Joe Barry. But when you have a chance to improve, and, hey, there's no question Wade Phillips would be an upgrade. So I don't have a problem with it. If they get Phillips, if they don't, it's probably one of those situations where you need a scapegoat, and obviously the head coach isn't going to make himself the scapegoat.
All right, these are the 6 openings. Just give me a gut feel, best guess of the best possibilities in these spots. Buffalo.
I still think Lynn's going to be elevated from interim coach.
Well, if you're Lynn, you're Lynn. you're now getting calls from other teams. Like Buffalo didn't snatch you right up. You're now getting calls from other teams. If Buffalo gives you the offer, but you're still interviewing, do you snatch the offer when you get it, or do you take your chances and try to get a better gig?
Well, you could take your chances, and that was what I was talking about with the dysfunctional front office. He is getting other interviews, and there's no question about that. And that's where I kind of said Frank, even though he's on the back burner, can get on the front burner really, really quickly if Lynn does turn them down. Because to the outside looking in, that organization looks like a mess. And certainly if you have other options, like I mentioned, the Kyle Shanahans and the Josh McDaniels of the world, if you have other options, you're not even going to look at Buffalo.
Okay, that's Buffalo. You think Lynn will be there. Let's go to San Francisco. Chip out, best fit there.
Well, I hope it's not Tom Cable. Who they're interviewing today, the offense. Yeah, that's sort of the old boys network. But they're sort of casting the wide net, and you can't. The 49ers, obviously, I think their mentality has to be they got to hire a GM first, and then let him make the decision. Because Jed York, I don't know if anybody wants him making a head coaching decision. Then all of a sudden you bring in a GM who doesn't want the head coach. So that's another example of an organization that's kind of a mess. And really, I can't get. They're interviewing a lot of people, and I can't get a beat on it because I don't know who the GM's going to be.
That's true. We'll give you a pass on that. Let's go to San Diego / possibly L.A.
Well, we keep talking about San Diego's problem is uncertainty because they haven't even started interviewing people. They have till January 15th to announce their intention of going to Los Angeles or not, and there's every indication everything's been exhausted in San Diego. They're probably going to have to make the move. But, the problem is that people don't think about real-world issues. And when you hire a head coach, you're not only hiring a head coach, you're hiring an entire support staff, assistant coaches, even down to secretaries. And guess what? They all have families, and they want to know where they're living. So until the San Diego Chargers know where they're playing in 2017, their whole search is on the back burner.
All right, and by the way, San Diego, as you mentioned, they did say they're going to do their workouts in San Diego, regardless of whether they're there or not. So just throwing that out there. All right, L.A. Rams.
Well, the L.A. Rams are interesting. First off, they have to go with an offensive-minded coach. That was the whole issue with Jeff Fisher. The whole issue, the Eagles they did well to create that environment around Carson Wentz with Doug and Frank Reich and John DiFilippo. The Rams didn't do that at all for Jared Goff. I think they've learned from that mistake. They have to bring in an offensive-minded coach. They want to talk to Shanahan. They want to talk to Josh McDaniels. I think this is finally the year that Josh McDaniels sort of goes back out from the wing of Bill Belichick. And my guess is unless they can trade for Sean Payton, unless Pete Carroll loses this weekend, which he's not going to, and gets forced out of Seattle, and they can get a really, really high-profile name, I think it's going to be Josh McDaniels.
Two left. Jacksonville.
Well, Jacksonville is interesting. I'll tell you who I think they should hire, and I think they should hire Tom Coughlin. I don't think they are, but we always talk about coaches in this league, and you look statistically at their shelf life. Everybody wants the guy who's going to be around for 20 years. Everybody wants the 38-year-old guy like Adam Gase, who, if he hits, is going to be around for 2 decades. But that organization needs continuity and needs to just start going in the right direction. And I think Tom Coughlin reunited would be the right way to go. And remember, you can get continuity in more than one way. Obviously, at 70 years old, he's not going to be around for 20 years. But he can also put together a coaching staff where you have the heir apparent already installed and sort of get that organization going in the right direction. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that's the way they should go, and he's the first name they interviewed.
And the last opening is in Denver, and we talked about Shanahan as the guy that you would think is the best fit there.
Yeah, I do, and it's a similar situation, and I don't think people realize, and I know you as a non-Atlanta guy realize how good that Falcons offense has been this season. They
lost to the Eagles.
Matt Ryan, MVP.
They matched the greatest show on turf, St. Louis Rams, in points scored. That's how good that offense was this season. And Kyle Shanahan is the architect of it, and that's why if he's not number one in all the coaching candidates in this hiring cycle, he's right there. He's 1 and 1A with Josh McDaniels, and I think John Elway likes him, and I think that's going to be his job if he wants it.
Real fast, any of these guys coaching the NFL this season coming up? Harbaugh, Marrone, Rex, Chip, Mike McCoy, Fisher.
Head coach, no. Obviously, a guy like Doug Marrone will certainly be in the league as an assistant. There's some talk that Chip might go with Bill Belichick in New England, but he's going to have to change his whole philosophy if he wants to do that, because he's not going to be able to be the headstrong guy who wants to. I mean, Tom Brady would laugh at the offense he runs. So he's going to have to be willing to learn if he wants to be an offensive coordinator. But Bill does like him personally, and he might try to help his career. But as far as a head coaching job, no. None of those guys will be head coaches in this league.